Good morning, students. Today we will start with Geography, Chapter 1, India, Size and Location. In this lesson, the idea is to understand where exactly India as a country is located on the world map, how big it is, and which are the neighboring countries that we have. So to start with, let us try to locate India in the world map. Here the first slide is explaining about the location of India. So here we can see the world map. We can see the different continents. So the different continents, here it is North America, and this is South America, this is Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and Antarctica. So these are the different continents. So where is India? India is located in the Asian continent. Then we can see the blue region. You all know that the blue region that we see around is the water, and that is oceans. And here you can see near to India, we can see the Indian Ocean. And between South America and Africa, here you can see the Atlantic Ocean. And finally, the remaining portions is the Pacific Ocean. So the entire globe is in the shape of a sphere, and that is how the earth is. So we all know that the earth is spherical in shape. So Pacific Ocean, we can see here is Pacific Ocean, and here also Pacific Ocean. So it is basically, it's like the sphere. So we are just looking at one view of the sphere, just to understand the location of the various continents. So from this, we got an idea that India is located in the Asian continent, and India shares its boundary with different countries as well as with Indian Ocean. So let us locate India more precisely. If you look at the world map, we can see that India is located in the northern hemisphere. We all know the directions. So the top part is the northern part and the down part is the southern direction. So we all know that India is in the Asian continent, and Asian continent is in the northern hemisphere. And then here we can see through the middle of the sphere, we can see an imaginary line is going. So the imaginary line that is running exactly at the center of the sphere, this is known as equator. And the equator, it divides into two. That is the upper part is the northern hemisphere, and the down part is the southern hemisphere. As I said, India is located in the northern hemisphere. The equator is located in such a way that it is equidistant to the poles. Here you can see this is the North Pole and this is the South Pole. And the equator is equidistant. It means the distance from the equator to the North Pole and the distance from the equator to the South Pole is equal. The extreme up the extreme up is the North Pole, and the extreme south is the South Pole. That we all know that. The As I said, the equator is equidistant from both the poles. Now, why do we say that equator is an imaginary line? Not only equator, we also talk about some other imaginary lines right now, and none of them exist in real. So it is not existed in real. That is why we are calling this line is an imaginary line. It is not only equator. As we go through the chapter, we will learn about other imaginary lines also. But then why do we talk about them? That is because if you do not have a basis, then it is very difficult to specify the location of the various continents or countries with respect to each other. Now we learn about what is latitude and longitude. Latitude. So the horizontal lines, The horizontal lines, you can see the red color dotted lines here you can see. So this horizontal lines, this is known as the latitude. Hmm. So we can say it is not imaginary lines, it is imaginary circles. See, you can see when we draw the lines, it is forming circles. It is imaginary circles. We learned about latitudes and longitudes in class 6. Now it is just a recap for us. So the equator basically represents 0-degree latitudes. These are the measurements at the line of latitudes. If you do not have the measurement, then there is no point having them. If we have latitudes and longitudes, so we are able to locate places. So latitudes and longitudes help us to locate the places. Now let's move on to how do we measure latitudes. The latitude is 0-degree at the equator and 90-degree at the poles. So the latitude, how can we measure the latitude? So towards the equator, the latitude is 0-degree, and towards the pole, in both the sides, it is 90-degree. That means the latitude increases as we move away from the equator and towards the poles. So here what we learned is, in the equator it is 0-degree, and when we move away from the equator, as we move away from the equator and towards the pole, it is explaining that the latitudes increases, and the latitudes measured in degrees. If we measure the latitudes upwards from the equator, it is measured in degree north. And if we are measuring the latitudes downwards, it is from the equator towards the south pole, then it is measured as degree south. So every point in this map which will have a value of latitudes which in correspond to its position along the horizontal axis. Like the same way how we draw graph in mathematics, we will draw graph same way. In graph we have x-axis and y-axis, and in maps we have latitudes and longitudes. Then now let's move on to the next one, explaining about the longitudes. Longitudes are imaginary circles around the earth that appears as vertical lines. Here you can see the green colored dotted line. See, this is known as the longitudes. So latitudes means the horizontal line. The horizontal line is known as the latitudes. So longitude means the vertical, opposite of that, the vertical lines. The vertical lines is known as the longitudes. So they are encircling the sphere in a vertical way. How do we measure longitudes? We learned here how we measure latitudes. Now we will learn how do we measure longitudes. So how we have equator for 0-degree latitude. Similarly, we have the central line, which is known as the prime meridian. See, this line that passes through the middle, this line is known as, the central line is known as prime meridian. So prime meridian corresponds to 0-degree longitude. So how do we measure it? If we move towards the west, it is measured in degree west. So when we move towards the west, it is measured in degree west. And when we move towards the east, it is measured in degree east. At the prime meridian, the value of longitude is 0-degree. And in the extreme west, the longitude is 180-degree. Here you can see in the extreme west, this is the extreme west point. So here in the extreme west, the longitude is 180-degree, And even in the extreme south also, it is 180 degree. I think the concept of latitude and longitude is clear now. Now let's focus on the position of India with respect to latitude and longitude. In latitude wise, the two extreme points here we can see, the two extreme points are Kashmir on the north and Kanyakumari at the south. The topmost point corresponds to 37 degree 6 minutes north latitude, and south point or the bottom point, it corresponds to 8 degree 4 minutes north. It means that latitude wise our country is located in 8 degree 4 minutes north to 37 degree 6 minutes north. This is the latitude of our country. Then in longitude wise, here we can see it is located in 68 degrees 7 minutes east and 97 degree 25 minutes east. So longitude wise, India's location is 68 degree 7 minutes east to 97 degree 25 minutes east. So this shows the exact location of our country. Now let's move on to the next slide. The next slide explaining you exclusively about the Tropic of Cancer. We all are familiar with the Tropic of Cancer. So here we can see this imaginary line that pass through the middle. This is known as Tropic of Cancer. So the Tropic of Cancer is a line of latitude that divides our country exactly into two equal parts. This is known as Tropic of Cancer. So the Tropic of Cancer divides our country into two equal parts, the north as well as the south. The Tropic of Cancer, it is the 23 degree 30 minutes north. So the Tropic of Cancer, 23 degree 30 minutes north, divides our country into almost two equal parts. And the Tropic of Cancer, it passes through 8 states, namely Gujarat, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Tripura, and Mizoram. So I think from this much information, it is very clear that where is India located on the world map. Now let's move ahead and we will discuss a bit about the size of our country. How big is India? In terms of the size, India is the 7th largest country in the world. It means in area wise. In area wise, India is the 7th largest country in the world. The first largest country in the world in terms of area is Russia. The landmass of India in terms of area is 3.28 million square kilometer, and India accounts for 2.4% of the total geographical area. Now let's understand the land boundary of India. Land boundary means, see, this complete part, this is known as the boundary, our borders. This is the land boundary, which is highlighted in red ink. That is the land boundary. Okay. So the India's land boundary is 15,200 kilometers. And the length of the coastline, in the next map we can see the length of the coastline. See here, which is highlighted in red ink. This much is the coastline. So the length of the coastline is 7,516 kilometers. This including Andaman and Nicobar Islands as well as the Lakshadweep Islands. So the first map what I showed you about the land boundary. The first map in this slide, I showed you about the land boundary, and India's land boundary is about 15,200 kilometer, and the length of India's coastline is 7,516 kilometer, including Andaman and Nicobar Islands and Lakshadweep Islands. See this dot, this redding, this area is known as the coastal line. And the capital of Andaman and Nicobar Island is Port Blair, and Lakshadweep Island is Kavaratti. India is bounded by the Youngfold Mountains. Youngfold Mountain is known as the Himalayan Mountains. In the next map, you can see that. See here in the slide, we can see that. See, this is the Himalayan Mountains. India is bounded by the Youngfold Mountain, and the Youngfold Mountain is known as the Himalayas. In the north to till the northeastern side, we have the Himalayan Mountains. The reason why it is known as Youngfold, or else why it is known as young, it means that the Himalayan mountain is formed 15 million years ago when the Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate. Towards the south, we can see the shape of India is tapers towards the south. Taper means narrow. See, if you analyze the shape of India, we can see towards the northern part, the shape of India, and when we move towards the south of India, the shape is different. So, from this, we can understand that towards the south, here we can see that the shape of India is tapers. Taper meaning narrow. It is narrow. The shape of India is narrow towards the sides, towards the south, and it divides the Indian Ocean into two halves. So here the Indian Ocean is divided into two halves. Here we can see the Arabian Sea in the west and the Bay of Bengal in the east. And from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, the entire stretch measures about 3,214 kilometers. And that is the distance between the top north to the bottom south. So this 3,214 kilometer is the distance, distance from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. Similarly, when we measure from the extreme west to the east, that is from Gujarat, extreme west means it is Gujarat, and extreme south means here it is Arunachal Pradesh. The distance is 2,933 kilometers. So always remember that the extent of east to west appears to be smaller than north to south. So when we know this distance, we will get a fair idea how big our country is. Now let's move on to the next slide. Moving on to westernmost part from Gujarat to the easternmost part till Arunachal Pradesh, there is a time lag of 2 hours. The longitudinal gap between Arunachal Pradesh and Gujarat is about 30 degrees. Since we cannot afford to have two different timings, therefore we adopted standard meridian of India. Here in this map, we can see this dotted line is the standard meridian of India. It is also known as Indian Standard Time. Hence, time along the standard meridian of India, 82 degree 30 minutes, which is passing through Mirzapur in Uttar Pradesh, is taken as the standard meridian of the whole country. The latitudinal extent influences the duration of the day and night as one moves from south to north. So by this we concluded the first half of the geography chapter 1, India size and location. The second half of this chapter explaining about India and the world and India's neighbors, we will learn in the next video. Now let's have a quick recap of today's class. Today we learned about India's location and size. We learned that India is lying entirely in the northern hemisphere, and the Tropic of Cancer divides India into almost two equal parts. India's total area accounts for about 2.4% of the total geographical area of the world, and India is the seventh largest country in the world by its size, and the first largest country in the world by its size is Russia. Then we learned about India's land boundary, as well as about India's coastline length. India's land boundary is about 15,200 kilometers, and the total length of the India's coastline is 7,516.6 kilometer. That includes Andaman and Nicobar and Lakshadweep Islands. Then we learned that India is bounded by the mountains in the northwest, north, and northeast. We learned about that area is the north, northwest, and northeast area is covered by the Youngfold Mountain, that is the Himalayas. And it began towards the south, it begins to taper and extend towards the Indian Ocean and dividing it into two seas, that is the Arabian Sea on the western side and the Bay of Bengal on its east. And finally we learned about the standard meridian, and the time along the standard meridian of India that passes through Mirzapur in Uttar Pradesh is taken as the standard time for India. So this is what we learned in today's class. This covers the first half of Geography Chapter 1, India size and location. So if you have any doubts related to today's topic, you can mail to dmcsonlinequeries@gmail.com. Thank you, students. Have a good day ahead.